When we speak of tech giants, understandably the focus is often on Silicon Valley. But here in Asia, we have our very own homegrown tech giant. Grab is Southeast Asia's most valuable tech company, a company that began as a tech-based transport solution but has grown rapidly into food, shopping, delivery, and even Fintech. But it has also had considerations about social impact built into the company DNA from its very inception. I spoke recently to Ilaria Chan, Grab's group advisor on social impact investments, about how the company's social mission has grown right alongside its commercial operations. Let me just ask you about social impact as a general philosophy within Grab. What is the role of social philosophy or social innovation, or however you want to consider these things? Do you consider this work as ESG, as a part of some sort of requirement from the stock exchange? Do you consider this as part of the DNA of the company? Tell me what the philosophy is.
That's a great question, and no better way to start. Grab was started in 2012 by Anthony Tan and Tan Hui-ling, who were classmates at Harvard Business School. Now, the backstory actually is very simple. Back then, Tan Hui-ling was a young consultant at McKinsey working in Kuala Lumpur, and she had to take rides really late at home via taxis to go home. And she basically felt so unsafe because Kuala Lumpur at that time was one of the top most dangerous cities in the world to take a taxi. She developed this human GPS system with her mother to make sure that at every landmark, time, place, she texts the car plate to her mother. And so the driver also knows that there's someone on the other side of the phone. That's how she tries to minimize the chance of any criminal activity on her. Fast forward, when they were at Harvard Business School, they actually met in a class called Business at the Bottom of the Pyramid. And both of them really aligned and connected on how do you create a double or triple bottom line business. And at that time, they started with hoping to fix the safety problem in Kuala Lumpur by essentially bringing the business model of Uber there. But what tech really can do is transparency, accountability, and tracking. And that's how Grab started.
So the social impact was within the very starting ideology of what they were doing, right?
Correct. Yeah. A long-winded way for me to say is it was essentially baked in from the beginning. It wasn't a nice side dish that they added on 8 years later after being a unicorn. No, not at all. In fact, every vertical that they end up developing has to have a social impact angle, meaning it is really solving a gap for the people in Southeast Asia.
So you talked about transparency and you talked about the broader issues around this kind of approach to doing business. Tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, how do you embed the social impact strategies within Grab? Is it your role in particular is someone who is designed to talk about these things? So tell me what you do and how you report this stuff. Is it part of your marketing concerns? How do you present this to the public?
Yeah, and in many ways we don't have a separate marketing strategy for ESG. For us, actually, what makes it difficult and easy is that we actually directly, anyone working on social impact in Grab liaises with the actual country heads, operation heads, people who are day-to-day managing the business. So for us, for example, I'll give you an example. We had a Break the Silence campaign last year, which means we had a concerted effort to want to help uplift people with disabilities, for example, people who have hearing disabilities, etc., to make sure that they are gaining employment in our platform. And we are also equipping the right technology and assistance to help them thrive. That is not something that we separately created as a weekend thing for a month to help hit the CSR target. Is actually pivoting and expanding the way we do business to make sure that these social goals are being hit. So actually my role, along with many others, is simply to liaise with the right stakeholders, influencers, foundations, strategic partners, etc., to make sure that we are implementing our social impact goals in our core business, not as a side dish.
And what are those goals? Outline to me what your strategy is, what your intentions are.
Sure. Actually, it's also very simple. For Grab, we are currently Southeast Asia's largest tech company. We are in ride hailing, which we are the largest in Southeast Asia. We are also the largest food delivery company. We have the largest e-payment wallet, and in our fintech arm, we have also loans and wealth management and insurance products. We are also in telemedicine, which is an online healthcare JV that we launched in Indonesia, a JV with Ping An Good Doctor. And we're also in parcel delivery. And recently, GrabMart also got rolled out to deliver essentials. Now, why did I name all that? Is because everything we do is an essential service. And our strategy really is to increase the livelihood and drive Southeast Asia forward, right? How do you help the mass flourishing by enriching the livelihoods, help people get jobs, help people get financial inclusion, help people have access to safety, help people be able to put down payments into their first houses, and doing all this in an integrity-filled way. That's our strategy. It's just our core business, doing it well, making sure everybody wins.
Well, we'll get deeply into a couple of those issues in a second. Let me just ask you one final general question. In terms of the role of technology in promoting social impact, I mean, it's great to have a philosophy and a DNA that focuses on these issues, but is tech in particular, and the kind of tech that Grab operates, any more useful in driving social impact than anything else? Do you think that technology is a particularly strong motivator or even an enabler of social impact thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And especially at a time where I think big tech is receiving a lot of negative perception. I will say, you know what?
Because there is a lot of scope, as we have seen, for tech to do more harm than good.
And we're fully transparent, and there's nothing we cannot discuss. But actually, technology or big tech is a neutral term. It's like the term journalist, right? I want to say this because
which comes with its own baggage of.
But not all journalists sensationalize news and distort truth. There are a lot of journalists that bring truth and justice to the world. Now, technology is the same thing. Technology is merely a neutral description of an industry, same as gig economy companies, same as big tech. What is different is there are some players who, as they grow, they end up abusing their power, and some players do not, and they actually prosper, create jobs, and disrupt in a good way a lot of traditional industries that are becoming obsolete because of inefficiency. So I would first address that. It's a blank statement to put all technology firms into one bucket. And I think that there's a very important thing to know about technology too, which is universal. Technology is an amazing democratizing and deflationary powerhouse. Why is technology so viral? It's because it is able to eliminate a lot of inefficient middleman or inefficient things that were from the traditional brick and mortar industries, right? Why do we like to use Uber? Let's put that out, right? Because you don't have to stand on the street in New York in the middle of December, in the middle of snow, and wait for 20 minutes and not know that if you can or cannot hail a cab. Uber allows you to have that transparency and matching of supply and demand so that you can immediately locate a vehicle so you can be safe. That is at its best what technology can do. Democratizing is the same thing, right? If we create a good product, you can be a woman in a third-tier city in Indonesia applying for the same loan as a man in a first-tier city, and you can actually try to minimize the human bias that is involved. And you can also allow, and this is an important point, Teymoor, I think one of the most powerful things I've heard is that currently where technology is allows the privileges of the first 1 billion people in the world, the tech that they enjoyed back then, currently the last 1 billion people in the world enjoying tech can enjoy almost the same privileges. You can buy a smartphone now for $49. It may not have the same memory as a top tier iPhone, but it can do its job. Back then, we had to pay thousands of dollars to get a terribly huge cell phone that was not a smartphone. But now as things evolve and technology is growing, people can enjoy the same service. I just want to give this last comment. A billionaire hedge fund manager in New York said he invested in Netflix because he realizes the privilege of Netflix is a billionaire and a middle-class person can enjoy the same convenience of accessing beautiful movies at the comfort of their home. That is one of the beauties of technology. Yeah.
It's a nice image to have. I mean, the beauty of democratizing and erasing gender barriers and class barriers and ability barriers like that is something that would be great to achieve. It would be nice to hear a little bit more about how that actually works in practice in some of your products. But before we get to that, let me just ask you one final quick question. You mentioned the gig economy, and that certainly is one of the areas where a lot of people are very critical of technology in creating an economy where so much of the way in which we do our work and how we are rewarded for it has changed. Give me your perspective on why the gig economy and how you as Grab operate within the gig economy can be a positive force.
Yeah, I mean, gig economy is, let me take a step back. I study this problem a lot myself because I spend a lot of time in the West, in the US, and a lot of time in Southeast Asia. And I'm originally from Hong Kong and I went to school in the UK. So I kind of see, and I love understanding the social network, the social safety net of each country. As I see the woes right now of gig economy workers, especially during a time of COVID, I realize that their outcry is not only against the power of big companies that do not put their interests first or even as a priority, but they are sad that they have no social safety net. They have nothing to fall back to. So if they have an accident and they cannot work for 2 weeks, then they have to keep paying for the rental of their vehicle, and they don't have insurance, they don't have welfare, they don't have W-2. And so they feel like they can literally fall under the poverty line in an instant. That is one of the negative parts of the gig economy scenario, right? But I will dare say, like any employers, there's a role that governments need to play as well to make sure that people have a safety net. And then rich-poor discrepancy is actually a very, very big problem. Because I will give you an example. During COVID, overnight, our transportation business just dropped like crazy, right? But luckily, we also have other different verticals. And what we did tirelessly is to basically transport our drivers from driving a traditional car to being a food delivery partner. So basically, overnight, we moved somewhat like 150,000 transport drivers into being food delivery people, so they immediately can have employment. And at that time, food delivery still is skyrocketing, right? At the same time, we see people who are sick. We make sure that we give them relief packages. We see people who need deferrals or commission rebates. We extend it to them. And we immediately set up relief funds and draw from our company's own pockets. We actually spent about $40 million to help relieve people who needed help, to make sure that these people who normally don't have that safety net as a gig worker would have it at times of need. Now, I'm not saying that we have a halo around our head, but I'm just saying as a company, that is the kind of thing that we have to do if we want the people who work with us and for us to prosper. And I think that many articles out there about gig economy workers who are complaining is that they feel that those companies do not help them, do not see them as people, and at their times of need, they do not provide a safety net for them. And I think that's a root issue.
There's a whole broader conversation to be had, and I don't think this is the place to do it, but there's a whole broader conversation to be had about the underlying nature of the gig economy as it's structured, and then the companies and how they react and how they behave in the context of how they treat their particular employees. But as I say, I don't think this is the time or place for that. Let's talk a little bit more about how COVID put the spotlight on a lot of the work that you do, and how the technology that you have, you started to repurpose around the idea of mitigating the effects of COVID and trying to have a social impact.
Yeah. So we are obviously very lucky because, as everybody knows, COVID disproportionately affects industries such as retail, F&B, hotels, etc., and of course transportation as well, alongside with all of that. So for us, we're definitely very fortunate that we already expanded into Fintech, into food delivery, into parcel delivery before COVID, and those are the areas which the demand has shot up. And frankly, we're at a supply constraint because we weren't able to provide the amount of services that was demanded of us. But what we were able to do, though, was number one, I mentioned just now, is to be able to say we need to dish out funds to help our delivery partners and merchant partners and drivers to weather the storm. So that's why during COVID, 40 million US dollars were spent. Senior workers at Grab were taking pay cuts, and that was the right thing to do. And some figures that was interesting, right? So we basically launched over 100 initiatives within 2 months to support all these different groups of people to transition and respond.
Like what? Give me an example of a specific action.
Yeah. So I mentioned one of the most difficult things is actually to immediately say, hey, someone who's a driver who is used to transporting human beings in a four-wheel car, can you go and transport food, right? We actually employ people who have disabilities too. Like, how do you do that? We have to pivot people into a completely different business model. And as you may or may not know, delivering food is not easy because, there's a time frame that you have to deliver. There's a protocol. You can't tip your bag a certain angle because the food will come out. There's a heat issue, all of that. So to really overnight be able to train and transition was something that was not easy, but we were very blessed that we were able to do it. Another example would be expanding what we call Grab Mart, which is groceries and essentials delivery, because that was what people needed, right? To have things delivered to you so that they cannot move. And for us, we had to move somewhat we expanded to 5 new countries in a mere 3 weeks. And that is not easy either. So I would say as cities shut down, we just had to step up to say, what do people need and how do we deliver to them? And correct. I mean, I could go on, but I think that is the personnel and the pivot in how do you deliver a good product, because people won't give you credit for delivering food suddenly out of nowhere, but they won't give you the credit for you to do that, but they will discredit you if you deliver bad food and rotten food and cold food to them. So those are the challenges. Mm-hmm.
One of the things you just mentioned, and one of the things you have done, which I've found interesting, is to begin to look at your tech platform and your tech capabilities and repurpose them to things that don't involve transport. And you mentioned in passing just a moment ago a wallet and the idea of financial mechanisms. Tell me a little bit more about what you're doing there.
Yeah. And, I know Fintech right now is a hot vogue term, but in fact, Grab, the first 7 years of our operations, we were laser focused on growing our ride-hailing business and making sure as well. It's actually through interacting and having a growing customer base and interacting with our driver partners, etc. We realized there are a lot of needs that are not being met. For example, Southeast Asia houses 650 million people. It has over 120% mobile penetration, but we see over 70% of people who are unbanked or underbanked. Now, that's pretty crazy, right? And also we look at the growth of Southeast Asia. It's actually been consistently growing at over 5%. That's probably an understatement over the past 10 years, which means that it's a massively growing part of the world. How can 70% of the people there not have a bank account, store their cash under their bed, and not have access to financial inclusion?
And there are many financial companies and others trying to solve that problem. How does Grab play into this market?
Correct. And the great question is, honestly, it's about us looking at people in our ecosystem and realizing, wow, our drivers who work so hard and they're so productive, they're such a backbone of the economy, right? But they are complaining about not being able to save enough personal savings to retire. That's kind of ridiculous. And as we hear these feedback, we realize that to respond to that, we need to find a way to give them microloans, right? So I'll give you an example because I like real life stories rather than theories. We have a driver called Rudy in Indonesia, and he was a construction worker before becoming a driver. And as he became a driver, he had sustainable income. But it's because he started tapping into our microloans, then he was able to buy a second motorbike so that his nephew can use to supplement the family income. And it's because of that growing in income, they're able to put a down payment to buy a house. And now he also is able to own a 4-wheel car under his own name and et cetera. That's how the American dream, frankly, even is. That's how it grows, right? If there's no credit being extended to people, and there's no way to record their credit history, people cannot grow and thrive outside of what's been dealt to them on day one. And that is really our mission, right? Is to make accessibility and affordability in financial inclusion so that it's not only a rich person's privilege. Yeah.
It's an interesting market, in fact, isn't it? We've seen what's happened with WeChat in China and the way the financial system there has evolved very differently. I mean, is Grab looking at that sort of platform, that kind of service as being a big part of its future?
And I would presume when you say that sort, you mean super app having multiple verticals.
It's too complex an environment to really try and sum up in a single sentence, isn't it? I'm just wondering what your philosophies are in terms of using the platform that you've got and the tech that you've got to expand these operations that are not transport based and maybe more financially focused.
Yeah. So I think that people in the US or Europe, in the slightly more mature Western countries, there's a slightly different model. There's a lot more of each segment, and people don't tend to do super app models as much. Whereas in Asia, like we see in Tencent, Alibaba, and now in Southeast Asia, that seems to be something that works. I think it's actually quite simple. Asia, especially in Southeast Asia, we're in developing phase, minus Singapore, right? When things are developing, the harvest is plenty and the workers are few. So actually, if you're willing to get your hands dirty and create some viable product to address a need that hasn't been met, you will have customer adoption. Customer acquisition will not be hard, and you just grow on that, right? And people don't want to live, let's say, in Indonesia or in Vietnam versus, California. So the talent is also few. So then it will basically, out of selection, there will be fewer companies that are willing to do more things. And I personally think that's how the super app model works too, is you start hitting a few essential services and all these needs cross-pollinate, right? If you're a driver and you want to finance your own car, you need to have someone giving you financing. And if someone's giving you financing, then they have the credit history of knowing that do you, pay back on time? What is the salary you get every week? And if you build the credit history with them, then you're eligible to buy microinsurance products. And it keeps rolling out like that. So I think that really is how the backbone of super apps right now, especially in places like Southeast Asia and China, why it's working.
Okay, well, while we're talking about branching out into apparently unrelated areas of business, let's move from finance onto something else you're doing, which is EdTech. Now, you got some connection with Microsoft talking about education. Now, how does that fit into both the philosophy and the practice of Grab?
Yeah. EdTech is not a main core or even formal vertical of ours, but we believe that we really need strategic partners. We don't believe in building everything from scratch ourselves. If someone out there does something better, we would love to partner with them so we can actually complement each other. Microsoft is one of those strategic partners that we really value. They're strategic and they're investment partner with us. So we align on the mission, which is to help mass flourishing. Now, technology really, especially in Southeast Asia, is a robust enabler to help people flourish and grow, help the pie grow. But there's also a very obvious gap, what is needed for the future and what is being offered right now. So the partnership, the EdTech partnership with Microsoft is actually very simple. We just want to bridge digital skills gap together, especially to the underserved communities. So the ecosystem that we offer to include students. We partner with universities to develop tech talent, giving applied learning, hackathon, etc. Educators, right? Help them build cloud-based skills. And there's also underserved youth. So we actually partner with nonprofit to ensure underserved young people have access to digital schools training. And also for our drivers, actually, we help them get certified through Grab Academy. This is also, part of our Microsoft partnership, is to help them be digitally literate and have learn entrepreneurial skills, and help them set up their online business if they want to start an online business. And as they upskill, we open up a network for them if they want to expand their career. So actually, we open up ecosystem for them to apply for upskilled jobs as well if that's what they want to do. So that really is the EdTech element. Is we don't want to just provide a product and say, we play, you don't play. We actually want to teach if people want to learn, because that prospers everyone.
Fantastic. Let me end with that issue of partnership. I'm glad you brought it up. It's been kind of interesting in the past few years, even before COVID, actually. I saw a lot of this talk when Bitcoin was a big deal a couple of years ago. And the idea of decentralization, the movements of grassroots action and the Generation Z, or wherever we are now on that whole generational scale, younger people beginning to take more activist stances in what they do. the idea of partnerships has grown and grown and grown over the past few years, and COVID has kind of stressed that. Tell me a little bit about the Grab philosophy around partnerships. What else are you doing in creating that? And how do you create partnerships, not just with other corporates, but with maybe NGOs and governments?
Yeah, what a great question to end with, because at the end of the day, especially I think COVID has taught us is that no one can do everything on their own. We desperately need each other. And at Grab, actually, since day one, we realized that governments, especially in Southeast Asia, you have to have a good relationship with them and also see where I can come in and help and serve you. Because government cannot be separate, especially in developing economies with private companies that are growing at scale. So that has always been our philosophy. Partner with government, understand the priorities and need, and know how we can come and fill in with our business. Partnerships, so there's a corporate side, there's a nonprofit, there's a government. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples with corporates that are a little bit different. So for example, Hyundai is a great partner of ours as well. And because the importance of environmental and emission is a core issue for everyone, we are going to roll out the adoption of electric vehicle with them, since they are a giant EV maker, and how to bring and roll out electric vehicles in Southeast Asia. Now, of course, there's also infrastructure problem, which then leads us to our partnerships with different governments in the 8 countries that we work in. We need to understand, how does a government envision growing and creating and changing the infrastructure of their cities going forward. So in Indonesia, for example, there are certain parts that are building smart cities, and that's actually where we can come in and add value. So that's how we also work both with corporate and with government to envision, how do we create a greener and more efficient future. Nonprofits, we're constantly partnering with them, and I think it really is depending on what are the needs at the moment. So for example, I mentioned that we want to make a very conscious effort to employ people with disabilities, because they are actually very productive and very hardworking people. But what they do need will be help. So, for example, we have paraplegic drivers that need a very specially fitted car so that that person can drive. We will work with the nonprofits that actually have contact with these people to onboard and train, and then we will also fit vehicles that will help them be able to realize their potential. So I would say this kind of partnership is the engine that keeps Grab going in operating in a region like Southeast Asia.
Fantastic. Ilaria, we've talked a lot, but I get a sense that we've only really started scratching the surface of some of these issues and some of the things that Grab is doing. But thanks very much indeed for talking to us and giving us an insight into the company philosophy as to how you approach social impact and how you approach your markets. Appreciate you being with me.
Thank you so much, Teymoor. Thanks for having me.